After 12 weeks of evidence, the jury now has the Paul Flores trial in their hand. Hey, just what will the jury say? What will the verdict be? Well, you're going to hear about that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. Well, what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, hello and welcome again to Charlie Crime Buster. Today we're looking at a 26-year-old code case that has now gone to trial and is in the jury's hands. Lots of things to say about that, but first a very special welcome to all of our new listeners. Hey, we get them every single week. So welcome aboard. Hey, let me invite you to reach out with a shout out. Yep, send me an email. We appreciate you and have a special gift to each new listener or anyone who reaches out with a shout-out this week. Reach out with a shout-out. Hey, we send that to you electronically, so you don't have to leave your physical address or anything like that. Just our way of saying thank you for being a part of our program. You can reach me directly at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, also feel free to offer suggestions, ideas for future episodes. Or maybe you just want to say hi. Reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We're going to leave you a link in the show notes. Hey, also, some of you may want to help us in our special project supporting law enforcement, our first responders, and the military. You also can do that by just going to peacemakernetwork.com. There you can read how we support these special people. Click on that donate button. Become a badge, B-A-D-G-E, badge supporter for as little as $3. Those who join with us this month, we're going to send you a vacation voucher worth hundreds of dollars for your next vacation. Again, go to peacemakernetwork.com today. Join us in our support of America's heroes. Now, before we get into our focus today, let me take a moment to ask you, that is, if you're listening in real time, or you're currently listening, please say a prayer for the many of our fellow Floridians. As you know, we were visited, or maybe I should say invaded, by the Hurricane Ian. It was a mammoth storm. It caused death and damage. And Florida, as you know, is a resilient state, so, as they say, this isn't our first rodeo with hurricane damage. But your help and support, of course, is welcome. So today we're going to be looking at the Paul Flores trial. We've been keeping you updated on what's happening. That case is now in the hands of the jury. Now, if you're not familiar with Kristen Smart, she is the young college freshman that disappeared 26 years ago after attending a party that was near the campus of Cal Poly. Now, the real only suspect actually is Paul Flores, and he and his father right now, they're on trial for murder. Paul for murder, his dad Reuben for helping to cover up his son's crime and disposing of the body. It is a code case turned hot, again, by mostly a Common Roots campaign, which included podcasting and social media. Now, if you'd like to know more about this case, just go to charliecrimebuster.com. Go to the episode page, and you're going to find plenty of material to binge on, and you can get caught up. But right now, let's talk about where the jury is on the case. Now, the jurors in the Kristen Smart murder, well, they're going home for what has been called a long weekend this weekend, and that is without having reached a verdict. You see, they still have to decide whether Paul Flores is guilty of murder in the commission of a rape, whether his father, Reuben Flores, was an accessory who helped cover up the alleged crime. Again, Kristen Smart was a freshman at Cal Poly when she disappeared in May of 1996. And multiple witnesses identified a fellow student, Paul Flores, as the very last person they saw with Kristen as they walked back to the dorms from that off-campus party. Now, Flores and his father, they were arrested in April 2021. They were charged in connection with the case, and that trial started way back this past July. Now, the men have their own juries. That's right, 2 different juries that are deciding their fates separately. There was approximately 12 weeks of evidence that each juror now must review and consider as they make that important decision. Someone said, one of the attorneys, the defense attorneys, quote, "I suspect in this case the jury instruction is about this thick, probably a couple of inches thick." And the Council of California, you see, they're responsible for providing the jury instructions. That's what Trace Milan, a local defense attorney, said. He went on to say they maintain volumes of text, that of all that the judges and the lawyers have. Now get this, each juror, they have to read the instructions at his or her own pace. So it can take quite a bit of time just to read the instructions. And then you have to understand the instructions, and next you then deliberate amongst themselves as to what the instructions might mean. Now, we do not really have access to the specific instructions of the Christian Smart murder trial, but that packet likely includes, well, they're going to define homicide, they're going to give instructions on what reasonable doubt is, going to talk about circumstantial evidence and anything else that might come to play when those juries are all talking among themselves and coming up with a decision. You see, the juries, they also have to consider maybe lesser included offense. And, of course, that'll bring a whole nother set of instructions. You see, if they're unable to decide whether Flores is guilty of murder, then they got to, well, move on and look and see if he's guilty or not guilty of other lesser included offenses. An example of that would be manslaughter. But once the jury decides the defendant is guilty, then they don't have to go into the lesser included offenses, so it could be quicker. Now, that jury for Paul Flores, they began deliberating on Tuesday. The jury for Ruben Flores, they started their deliberations on Wednesday. But the juries now, they're not going to resume their deliberations until this coming Thursday. You see, that court, they had already set apart that they were going to be dark Monday through Wednesday. It was a pre-scheduled break. Now, if convicted, if the jury says guilty, well, Paul Flores, he faces a sentence of 25 years to life. Ruben, well, maximum sentence would be 3 years in jail for him. Now, there's going to be a couple of days of, well, the jury just getting their bearings and what they are doing, deliberations. So, as they come back into deliberations on this Thursday, I guess we'll see if they've already heard enough to make up their minds, or will they take time to go back and review all that evidence in 12 weeks? It could be a quick response, or it could take several days. Now, next, I'd like to go over with you some of the statements from the closing statements of the prosecutors and the defense. But before we do that, it is now time for what we call our Crazy Crook story. You see, there was a man in Tampa, Florida. That happened on this October the 1st. He was arrested for robbing a woman of her wallet. However, this crazy crook decided to make matters worse when he attempted to make, quote, unquote, a great escape. Yep, according to Tampa Police Department, 32-year-old man, Dwayne Dean, he stole the woman's wallet in the parking lot of a hotel that was located there in Tampa on Northwest Shore Boulevard. He then fled the scene, took off. Actually, it was a pretty intense chase. Now, the people who were looking, they told police that he had headed straight toward Cypress Point Beach. Authorities did find him there, but he wasn't through running. Nope, not this crazy crook. To avoid getting arrested, well, he jumped into the water. 200 feet into the water, he swam. And he was being chased by aviation, a helicopter, that's right, Marine and dive and patrol teams. But eventually, of course, he surrendered, and he was taken into custody. Actually, the officials actually put it on their Facebook page. The community, they were not shy in sounding off. One said, well, he missed his calling. He could have been a great athlete at diving into the water like that. Someone else said, well, he must be thinking that he was playing the Grand Theft Auto game. And many people just thank the officers for catching him doing their job. But get this, my friend. The original charge would just have been petty theft. That would have been, well, a misdemeanor. Maybe fine, or maybe even 6 months of jail time at his best. But now, because this crazy crook decided to run, he now is facing eluding or fleeing the police. And here in the state of Florida, well, my friend, that's a third-degree felony. So by running, he moved a misdemeanor to a felony. And from a fine, or maybe at the most 6 months of jail, now he's looking for up to 5 years in prison. That's right, years. And a $5,000 fine. And 5 years probation on top of that. So, this crazy crook. He did go from the simple charge of petty theft, turned it into a police chase he could not possibly win. You can't outrun a helicopter. Then he got the bright idea that he could outrun that helicopter by jumping into the water. My friend, this indeed is our crazy crook story of the week. Now back to our main focus. Our jury is going to be considering some of the last things they heard from the trial. That's the closing statements that the prosecution and the defense brought. And in the closing arguments, well, the St. Louis Obispo County Deputy District Attorney, Chris Prevel, well, he recapped all the evidence that he presented in the case that he built against Paul Flores. And I loved his opening statement in his closing. He said this: "It's been a long trial. It's been 11 Sundays since I've given my opening statement." That's what he told the jury in his closing statement. He goes on to say, quote, "It's been 1,370 Sundays, though, since Stan and Denise Smart waited for that phone call. The phone call that would never come." He also said it's been 1,370 Sundays that the grieving parents have been searching for their daughter. And then he turns, looks at the accused, and he said, "But you know where she was all along. She was under their deck," he said, pointing at the Flores men. You see, the community really moved heaven and earth to find her, but Reuben and Paul Flores, the attorney went on to say, they moved the dirt under their deck to hide her. He did also say there were no cameras there in Paul Flores' dorm in 1996. There was also no witnesses to the crime committed in the bedroom, just like there's no witnesses to what happened to Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe. He said that while he was referring to the two women who had testified in the trial that they were actually raped by Paul Flores. Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe tell us what Christian could not, and that was that she was raped. That's what the attorney said. Or that Paul Flores tried to rape her. He went on to say that they are speaking for Christian. And then he went on to talk about how Paul Flores lied. You see, he talked about the lies that Paul Flores told investigators time and time again. Lies about his black eye and about other things that happened that night that proved, and I'm quoting the attorney here, that Paul Flores is guilty as sin, unquote. He went on to say justice delayed does not have to be justice denied. You now know, he says to the jury, the truth of what happened. He also talked about how Paul Flores participated in a multi-month hunt of Smart. And he brought out the fact that several Smart's friends testified of her disappearance, that Flores said he would hang around her dorm, stare at her, seek her out, try to interact with her. In other words, he stalked her. He referred to Campos' testimony. She said that Smart was just too nice to tell him off. You see, what we would see as kindness, well, the defendant in this case saw as a tease. That was referring to Jennifer Hudson's testimony that Paul admitted to her that he had killed Smart. Now, the prosecutor also pointed out suspicious activity, and that while he was seen around her dorm prior to her disappearance, well, amazingly, after her disappearance, you couldn't find him near the dorm. proving that he was there all the time just to stalk her. According to witness testimony, you see Flores wasn't seen in Muir Hall after her disappearance. Prevel went on to say he had no reason to go back because, quote, his hunt was over. On the evening of May the 26th, 1996, the attorney goes on to say around 10:30 p.m., those testified that they dropped Smart off sober at a party on Crandall Way. At that same party, before Smart arrived, well, he pointed out already the state of Paul Flores' mind that night. He talked about Kendra Coed, who testified that Paul Flores forced himself on her while trying to separate her from her group of friends. And then he goes on to say to the jury, do you see the pattern? That pattern tells you about his mindset that night. He was going to do whatever he could to hunt that night. Coed even said that she had told Smart to stay away from Paul Flores that evening. Then sometime between 10:30 and 12 a.m., there were multiple witnesses that saw Paul Flores and Smart speaking at the bar, and the two actually fell to the ground. Now remember, Paul had told officials that he and Christian did not interact very much at that party. But the prosecutor points this out, and he says that negates Paul Flores' claim to enforcement that the two did not interact much at the party. He also talked about how one of the attendees, Trevor testified that Smart kissed him twice, once before she was at the bar of Paul Flores and once after, and get this, Trevor did not smell alcohol either time. There are many people who said they did not see her drink anything, but yet she was intoxicated. This refers to his pattern to try to drug women to make them unconscious. And then he went on to say that 90 minutes after Smart arrived at the party, she was passed out in the neighbor's lawn, face down. Too intoxicated to consent to sexual intercourse. That's what the attorney said. And of course, in the trial, they've tried to prove that this is his MO, his method of operation. He tries to drug women to get them so intoxicated that they're unconscious, unable to participate in saying no. You see, Tim Davis and Cheryl Anderson, they were two people who helped walk Smart home, and they testified that Paul Flores inserted himself into this entourage as they were walking Smart home. Now, Davis, he left early on, and then before Anderson left from the walk, she said that Paul Flores promised to get Smart home safe. Now, even though he promised to get her home safe, he testified to authorities that he let her walk herself. Even though she could barely stand, he let her walk herself about 200 yards to her dorm. Just did not compute. He went on to say that, under Reuben's deck, this is Reuben, Paul's father, under Reuben Flores' deck, he said, that was a perfect spot to hide her body. You see, the prosecution's theory is that after Paul Flores killed Smart, he called his father, Reuben Flores, to help move Smart's body out of his dorm and to bury her body under his father's deck, quote, the perfect hiding spot. That was before they moved her after a search warrant was going to be carried out at the home. He also pointed out, the attorney, Prevel did, that 4 cadaver dogs had searched Paul Flores' dorm building, all entered different locations, yet they all alerted to the same location, Paul's dorm room. 3 of them alerted to the scent of human death on the mattress. 4th one could not pinpoint a location on the bed because the mattress had been removed. Then he talked about the ground-penetrating radar. Located a soil anomaly about 6 foot long, 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, the size of a human body, particularly Smart's body. You see, she stood at 6'1". It just happened to be the perfect hiding spot for a human body. That's what the attorney told the jury. And it just also happened to have staining consistent with a decaying human body. And it just happened to happen at the approximately length of a human body. That's that staining that was consistent with a decaying human body. Then he went on to talk about the soil samples that were taken from that stain. It tested positive for human blood. Also contained fibers that were the same colors as the clothing that Smart was wearing when she disappeared. Red shoes, black shorts, gray top. And the scientist who tested those fibers, well, he offered to run a fiber comparison test. He said, but we can't because they're still holding on to the body, talking about Paul and Reuben. There was a search warrant that was carried out on Reuben Flores' home on February the 5th, 2020. Then around a week later, a neighbor of Reuben Flores, Miss Holman, get this, she saw a cargo trailer backed into the yard with a fence removed. An area of that trailer later reacted to a test that indicates human blood was present. That's in the trailer. Reacts with cleaning products like bleach. Now, none of the rest of the trailer was cleaned, so why clean just that spot? He says, we know why. They got Christian out of the ground and they put her in that trailer. Now, the prosecutor also reminded the jurors that of Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe, who testified that they were raped. You see, they did not have to prove it without a reasonable doubt. They only had to prove it's more likely than not that Paul Flores raped them. You see, their assaults do not have to be proven above a reasonable doubt. If you find that just one of the two rapes occurred, then you can also conclude that Paul Flores was disposed or inclined to commit sexual offenses. That's what he told the jury. You can further conclude that Paul Flores was likely to commit or did commit or attempt rape in this case. He goes back to the alleged rapes of Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe. He describes they're all too similar. You see, Paul Flores, he isolates the women. He gives them a drink, drugs them. We all know what happens next. He drugged women. He went into his kitchen, spiked their drinks, and raped them. Both Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe, they testified in this trial that Paul Flores also used a red ball gag to rape them. A detail that was corroborated by a screenshot of a homemade video of a woman on Paul Flores' bed with her eyes closed, a red ball gag lodged into her mouth. The attorney went on to say it's critical collaboration between the two women who don't even know each other. By just a post note here, there was a whole bunch of videos of that. They only allowed these two women to testify, but there were tons of videos showing him raping women in unconscious states. He went on to say that no doubt that Smart was incapacitated that night, unable to consent for herself. You see, Trevor, he testified that he had been drugged in 2012. Smart's behavior the night she disappeared was similar to his own. Predators are going to prey. That's what the prosecutor says, and what I'm asking from you, the jury, is accountability. And then the prosecution, well, they ended their closing arguments early Tuesday afternoon. And the defense, they were going to begin theirs a little shortly after. Well, as you can see, my friend, there is plenty of evidence there to consider. It's been said that bring in a case with circumstantial evidence, well, that you have to have that evidence to be overwhelming. Do you believe that this evidence is overwhelming? Next, we're going to get to the defense's closing statements. But now, it's time for what we call our Courageous Citizen of the Week story. And by the way, it was easy for me to pick one. You see, after that hurricane hit us here in Florida, well, heroes, I've got to tell you, courageous citizens came from all over America to help the people of Florida. Linemen, utility workers from other states, they came by the thousands to get that power back on that was so much needed in this crisis. Volunteers came from all over, church groups, charity groups, masses of others came to help. Many donated to funds like the Red Cross and other disaster relief funds. Groups that brought food, water, and help to stranded Floridians. My friend, truly, these men and women from all over the United States that came to help people in Florida, they, my friend, are our multiple courageous citizens of the week. Now, my friend, the defense, they also made closing statements. They were not as long as the statements of the prosecutor, but I can summarize it up pretty quickly for you. They just simply attacked the evidence. You see, Paul Flores' defense attorney, Robert Sanger, he began his closing arguments in the Christian Smart murder on Monday. He claimed the prosecution evidence amounted to, quote, conspiracy theories that's not backed up by facts. You see, Paul Flores had been on trial for that 1996 murder of Smart, for more than 3 months. That's there at the Monterey County Superior Court. Sanger said during the closing argument that the district attorney, that his goal during the prosecution closing arguments was not to showcase evidence, but rather to evoke emotional prejudice against Paul Flores. He did that by using phrases like, quote, unquote, guilty as sin. He went on to tell the jury that what the district attorney says is not relevant. My belief is not relevant. You have to look at the facts. And then he goes on to say that the publicity of the case is, quote, the elephant in the room. He went on to add that there were people inserting themselves into the case, along with extensive news coverage locally and nationally. He said a lot of that had influence on such testimony. Basically, he says such evidence, it's simply a play on emotions of the jury, and it's not valued as real evidence. That's pretty well what the defense alleged. But now, let's take a moment and get to the heart of it. What will the jury say? What will the jury say in this case? Well, I'm going to make it very simple for you. From early on, I thought there was enough evidence to convict. Even 2 years ago, when I did the very first episode on Charlie Crimebuster of the disappearance of Christian Smart, that was before an arrest even, before a trial. I stated back there 2 years ago there was enough evidence to convict, and my friend, I still believe that today. I do believe the jury will convict both Paul and his father, Reuben Flores, of this crime. Now, I have to tell you, juries can be strange. Can you say O.J. Simpson? Can you say Casey Anthony? Oh, my friend O.J., he was truly, quote, unquote, guilty of sin. And Casey Anthony, she was the most hated woman in America, and that was for a reason, and that reason was she was guilty as well. But the juries in both of those trials, they got it wrong. They could in this one as well, but I doubt it. You see, most of the time the jury gets it right. I hope so in this one as well. But let me ask you, what do you think? I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? Do you think there's enough overwhelming evidence, even though some of it's circumstantial? Do you believe there's enough overwhelming evidence to get a conviction? Do you believe the jury will vote guilty? Love to hear from you about it. We don't know at this point. Email me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. In the meantime, let me just take a moment to ask you to take care. Watch out for one another. It could have ended up much differently for Christian Smart if others had not allowed one strange, unusual man by the name of Paul Flores. Many people testified that he was acting weird that night. And yet you let the weird guy take this woman home alone on her way to dorm. That should not have happened. So if you have a friend, they're intoxicated, unable to defend for themselves, take time to watch out for them, won't you? Don't walk alone late at night. Don't be vulnerable to a crime. So until next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster, reminding you that while we're on jury watch, while we're waiting to hear a verdict from this case, let me just encourage you. Be alert. Be safe. For the life you save, it may be your very own.